In today's farm report, thinking about soil health, cover crops, reduced tillage, minimizing the use of herbicides and insecticides are all topics we likely hear and read about when working on the farm and trying to minimize the impact to the environment. But, as Dan Martins with the University of Minnesota Extension Service Office explains, there are other things that impact our local habitats, and it may be thousands of miles away.
Had a good visit with a thoughtful farmer recently about soil health, cover crops, reduced tillage, minimizing use of herbicides and insecticides, topics we're likely to hear and read a lot about through the winter meeting season. This brings to mind a few notes from a discussion offered by Extension Pest Management Specialist Bruce Potter at a Certified Crop Advisors workshop held in Paynesville last September. If you've heard or worked with Bruce, you know he takes a pretty practical approach to things. He doesn't mind stepping out of the box to take a different look at something. He's been around long enough to remember things we've learned in the past that might be useful to consider as we think about something thought to be new now. I shared a couple observations from Bruce back in October. Here are a couple of more. As a pest management specialist, Bruce gets in on discussions about damage to non-target species like monarch butterflies. Bruce would readily agree that we should learn everything we can to protect beneficial insects while working to manage insects that cause significant damage to agriculture and horticulture crops. Bruce makes a pretty strong case for making spray decisions for pests like soybean aphids and potato leafhoppers based on research-based thresholds and against the practice of routine spraying just to be sure without carefully evaluating thresholds. Bruce also makes a point that we should be aware of other forces in nature and the world around us that can cause significant problems for beneficial insects as well. He shared, for example, a serious freeze on January 11, 2002 in Mexico that killed a large portion of the monarch butterfly population that spends the winter there. 60 to 70% of the monarch population overwinter in two mountain areas. On one of these, it was estimated that 74% of the monarchs were lost. On the other, it was 81%. In 1982, it was estimated that about 70% of wintering monarchs in Mexico froze to death as a result of 3 days of rain and sub-freezing conditions. Bruce mentioned that deforestation in that area was also a concern, and that the widespread drought in the Midwest of the U.S. was tough on monarch populations in that area. So along with being smart about what we're doing, we should be aware of other factors that impact the population cycles of critters around us. Letting milkweed grow where it's not causing a significant problem seems like a sensible thing to do. I'd have to say I was amazed at the number of monarch butterflies I saw while taking a look at some small grain and hay fields with a farmer last summer in the middle of August. Bruce also mentioned the importance of learning about alternative crops in terms of pest management and where and how they might fit into other crop rotations. He shared the example that pennycress is an alternative host for soybean cyst nematode. Historically, we think about pennycress as a weed. Now it's being studied as a potential oilseed crop. That might turn out well, but it certainly makes sense to give some careful thought to how it fits with managing soybean cyst nematode. I'm Dan Martins with U of M Extension. Thanks for the thoughtful care you give to things you're doing around your home and farm and workplace.
The University of Minnesota Extension has released its 2015 crop variety trial reports. Dan Martins with the University of Minnesota Extension Service Office in Morrison, Benton, and Stearns counties looks at the 2015 corn silage variety trials and reminds producers of an upcoming land rent workshop going on tomorrow in central Minnesota.
Let's take a little bit of a look today at the 2015 corn silage variety trials. The University of Minnesota had corn silage field trials on farms near La Crescent and Rochester in southeast Minnesota, Hutchinson and what we might call South Central, and Melrose in our area. Hybrids were planted at 35,000 seeds per acre in 30-inch rows. At Melrose, planted on May 1st and harvested on September 18th, with a goal to harvest at an average moisture of about 65%. At Melrose, the actual moisture test averaged 59%, with a range from 54 to 65, so drier than the goal. Dry matter yields average 11.3 tons per acre with a range from 9.8 to 12.9. If we convert that to 65% moisture, the average wet ton yield would be about 32 tons per acre with a range from 28 to 37. There are several ways to estimate grain yields from silage yields. Nothing compares to measuring grain and silage yields side by side. If we use 7 bushels of corn per wet ton of corn silage at 65% moisture, we'd estimate an average of 226 bushels per acre, with a range from 196 to 258. Starch tests indicate there could have been more bushels per ton. Jeff Coulter, U of M Extension corn agronomist, offers these suggestions in picking corn silage hybrids. Longer season hybrids tend to have higher silage yields. Hybrids planted for silage should be 5 to 10 days longer in relative maturity than hybrids for grain. Later hybrids may not be the best choice for farmers wanting early silage or the option to harvest the corn for grain. The 54 varieties at Melrose ranged in relative maturity from 88 to 107 days. Select multiple hybrids with a range in relative maturity to have a wider harvest window. Harvesting at the correct moisture level is critical for producing high-quality silage. Planting hybrids with a range in maturity also widens the pollination window and reduces the risk that the entire crop will be hurt by hot and dry conditions during pollination. Consider agronomic traits that are important on your farm, such as herbicide and insect tolerance. Drought and disease tolerance. Standability may be less important for silage hybrids due to earlier harvest. Because corn silage is an energy source for livestock performance, producers should consider both silage quality and yield when selecting hybrids. Milk per ton is an overall indication of quality and is estimated from a forage analysis for crude protein, NDF fiber, NDF digestibility, starch, and non-fiber carbohydrates. Once a suitable group of hybrids has been identified based on milk per ton and yield, further selection within this group can be based on specific forage quality and agronomic traits. Consult with a livestock nutritionist as well as your agronomist in selecting corn silage hybrids. I'm Dan Martins with U of M Extension, and maybe we'll see a couple of you at the Land Rent Workshop Friday, January 11th at the Cold Spring American Legion at 9:30 or Foley City Hall at 1:30.
Not a lot of changes this month in Wednesday's round of Agriculture Department reports. We do have a new forecast for the U.S. cotton crop, 13 million bales, down another 250,000 from last month, mostly because of all the wet weather problems in North and South Carolina. Price prospects remain the same, an average 59 cents a pound, down about 2 cents from this past season. We have a new U.S. orange crop forecast, just under 5.3 million tons, down 4% from the last forecast, 17% below last season. Other crops now, USDA looking at a record world wheat crop, 2 million tons more than the last forecast. No changes to U.S. prospects, though. Still a 6.5% drop from last season in exports, a 16.5% drop in prices to $5 a bushel. For corn, slightly smaller exports, slightly larger stocks, but no change in the price prospects, $3.65 a bushel, down about 1.5% from last season. Soybeans, no changes from last month, still expecting the largest season-ending stocks in 10 years. Prices down 12% from last season at $8.90. In Washington, Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.